All right, folks, one more time here on the LA Sparks 365 Network, your 24/7 365 comprehensive home of the WNBA and your two-time WNBA champion Los Angeles Sparks. Welcome in, folks, to Sparks 365 Free Agency Central, alongside Chris Amanci from the Earnhardt Studios in Anaheim, California, via Apple's FaceTime. Kyle McClure rejoining you folks here from Studio 171 in San Diego. Chris, no surprise that we're going to have an internet problem during our last show, and the woes continue, man. How's it going, though?
Good. Just probably going to my first time ever to high school football.
And yes, folks, we are still battling our technical difficulties again. We had a bit of a bomb out last show. So, Chris, apparently you're getting us in a lot of trouble here about saying the Sparks would win the WNBA title this season. But anyway, though, folks, in front of me, though, folks, on my computer desk, other than having Chris on my desk on FaceTime, I have in front of me, folks, the first list of compiled free agent targets for the Los Angeles Sparks. It's only a list of 5 players right now. Chris, there's a lot going on. I mean, we know that the season just ended about 2 weeks ago, Chris. You know that the list will be relatively small, man, but the list, what we compiled, though, man, from a few sources inside the Sparks front office, you know, a mixture of young talent, a few vets, and a few things included, Chris. I think, Chris, looks pretty promising, man, that we have 5 pretty solid players for the first full day of free agency, Chris, that, again, as we know, man, the list will not be completely full until for a few more weeks here. Again, we only had the first few come out because, you know, of a few things included, Chris. But, again, man, you know, again, Chris, to know, man, that we have the first list compiled, though, man, I mean, are you pretty excited, though, man, about the Sparks offseason, see what moves will be made, though, and who stays and who goes, and also who's going to be the new team head coach for the next season?
Yeah, just can't wait.
Now, folks, we will take your tweets here and possibly live Q&A, most of your tweets here, folks. So send them in about your thoughts about the list here, folks. We'll go through each of the players and talk about their game and stuff. So if you have any opinions about it, hit us up on Twitter at LASparks365, at CallumAc3, or at LASparksFan30, and please include the hashtag FreeAgency, and we will get to your tweets during the course of the show. All right, Chris, there's a list in front of me of 5 pretty solid FAs or free agents, Chris, that are on my list right here. Chris, we'll go through each player and talk about them, as you said, Chris. So the first player on the list right now, man, is Alexis Gray Lawson. Her last team was with the Phoenix Mercury from 2011 to 2012, a 5'8" guard going to her 4th season. Chris, she's really, Chris, she's sort of, you know, not really hopped around the league, man, but she's more so been one of those, you know, sacrificial lambs, you can say, where she's been brought in for either for camp or as a late in-game sub for Phoenix from 11 to 12, Chris. You know, I think there's upside for Alexis, man. Now, again, it's tough, though, man, to sort of grade players, though, when they only have 1 to 2 years under their belt, when they've, you know, really played for one team and didn't really get a fair shot, Chris. Now, I think, Chris, though, that the one position the Sparks need to improve on for next season, man, is their guard play, because the guard play was pretty atrocious this season between a few players, Chris. I'm not really, though, Chris, too high on Gray Lawson, though, man, because 2 years in the league, you know, not really too much size either, 5'8" as a guard, man. You know, there's a lot of other guards that are a lot better than she is, especially on the list here as well, and also across the league, Chris. Your thoughts, man? Again, you know, Gray Lawson, you know, a 2-year player with last played with Phoenix, 5'8", 4th year going into her 4th year, Chris. Should LA keep her on the watch list, or what do you think should happen here, man? Again, knowing that she's only played Chris, only played 2 full seasons in the league, both with Phoenix, and really was not really used to her abilities because of being that late in-game sub when the game was well out of control for Phoenix or for the opposition.
Probably the Sparks should maybe not keep her on a radar, maybe.
Chris, I think what's going to happen, man, is I think that all 5 will get training camp contracts, and they'll go from there. Now, Chris, the first player, I think, Chris, that deserves the fighting shot, man, is Megan Simmons. Megan Simmons, of course, folks, was drafted all the way in the 3rd round of the 2014 draft to the New York Liberty. Played 2 games and was cut by the Liberty in wake of Bill Laimbeer, of course, getting a few of his aged, seasoned former Detroit Shock players for his retirement home. Megan Simmons, Chris, of course, a 5'9" guard in her 2nd full season from Tennessee. Now, Chris, this was one, man, that you got a bit uh, agitated, pissed off with, and agitated during our earlier in the evening, Chris, about why all of a sudden now is LA going after her, man. But I did tell you, man, and I did say this too back on the forum with Shorty and Crystal back on August 19th, Chris, was again Megan had left the States to go play in Romania for the whole season before she did leave there. Before she did leave a few weeks ago to go back to play over in Romania. But Chris, I think though, man, that after seeing her get drafted, Chris, and I had a terrible feeling, as did Shorty, about her going to the Liberty, Chris, because I knew that she would not last there with Bill Laimbeer and his philosophy, Chris. This is one player, Chris, you cannot afford to lose off the radar, Chris. If you do lose Megan Simmons, Chris, you're gonna basically screw yourself almost, Chris. Now again, Megan's a 5'9" guard, played 2 games this year with New York before she was cut because of Bill Laimbeer's philosophy, Chris. This is one player, Chris, that myself and Trinisha Hardy have really wanted to see in LA, Chris, because of her all-around game, Chris. And again, hell, she's a UT Vol, Chris, so I think that she has a bit of an edge there with Candace Parker having control of the roster next season, Chris. Is she worthy, though, man, of a training camp contract for the 2015 season?
Yeah, I think Megan Simmons is worthy of a contract.
Chris, I think that after what she had gone through in New York, I think she's worthy and ready for another chance, Chris. I mean, obviously, Chris, this was not an instance, Chris, where we saw a player like Simmons, get cut and not do something about it during the season, Chris, where she, took the initiative, Chris, to say, okay, look, I gave them my best. Now let's see what else I can do, Chris. Where she, she didn't, she wasn't, like average people, Chris, or average athletes that would get cut, Chris, and then just, sulk about it and then, sit around and wait for someone to call them back, Chris, where she said, no, I'm not going to be one of those people. I'm going to, okay, I got cut, gave it my best shot, Chris. Now let's go see what else I can do. Let's see. Okay, I'll go play in Romania and see what happens there, Chris. And Chris, I believe that she is worthy, though. What she did, though, for UT her senior year with Holly under coach Holly Warlick, Chris, definitely worthy, Chris, of another shot. And I think she's going to get her shot in LA. Then, Chris, there is also a seasoned veteran on the list here, Chris, which is Leilani Mitchell, the 8-year veteran who was with New York from 08 to last season. Now, Chris, the problem here, though, is she's the smallest player height-wise on the entire target list right now, Chris. Leilani is only 5'5" and does play the guard spot, Chris, and will be going into her 8th year if she does come back, Chris. So she is a free agent, man. There's a couple of things, though, about Leilani, Chris, specifically, Chris, her health problems. She's had a few nagging injuries her whole career, Chris. It has not really been a player to really live up to her full potential, man. But I think, though, Chris, again, you kind of need some veteran leadership in some fashion. I think, though, Chris, that with Leilani playing under Bill Laimbeer's guidance for a few years, Chris, again, without a few injuries, Chris, I think she can have a small impact maybe on the team, Chris. But again, I'm more worried about the injury woes right now with Leilani, plus her health as well, and also, Chris, kind of about, a bit weary, though, Chris, about the height factor, though, Chris. A 5'5" guard, giving up a lot of size, especially, Chris, to Brittany Griner down low, perhaps, as well, if she's ever stuck down there against BG and, of course, against Diana Taurasi, Chris. She's giving up a good 5 inches on a lot of players, Chris. And also, man, I'm more worried, though, about the health of her going forward, Chris. Do you think, though, man, that Leilani Mitchell may be a fit, perhaps, for LA, or what is your thought right now about her again, Chris? There's a couple of, red flags, about her health, some injuries, Chris, but again, also her height factor as well, Chris, being 5'5". What do you think, though, about Leilani Mitchell's chances of making the Sparks next season? Because, again, she is on the list right here of possible FA targets. What do you think?
Probably will see, maybe give her a chance and trial, and we'll find out and see.
Chris, it's always good, though, man, if you can bring in seasoned veterans, like Leilani Mitchell, again, who's been in the league for 8 years, knows the ropes, and can really, be a tutor and mentor to these young kids coming up, either in the draft next season or what have you, Chris. Then there's one name, too, man, that I did check here that's going to be going to Sparks Training Camp, Chris, and a lot of people want to, Chris, is Jeanette Pollin, the soon-to-be 5th-year guard from Indiana, Chris, was a part of the 2012 WNBA title team for the Fever, Chris, a 6-foot guard going into her 5th season, Chris. Jeanette Pollin, Chris, was a big factor for the Fever in 2012. Man, she missed a lot of time because of an injury she had, but came back, Chris, and finished the job off of the Fever in the finals, Chris, and really, Chris, brought her great play when it counted the most, Chris, when it counted the most, man, which was, of course, in the playoffs, Chris. And I think, man, with Jeanette, again, okay, one injury, silent her, Chris, but you know what? She came back strong, Chris. You know what, man? the best part, though, man, she came through when the Fever needed her the most, Chris, which, of course, was in the postseason, Chris. I think that kind of gets her in the, in the mix here of being on the team next season because, again, Chris, veteran sort of, fifth-year player, 6-foot guard, that can match up with Taurasi and a few other guards that are at the same height, Chris. 5-year experience, Chris, and again, playing the guard role, Chris, but also, man, turning it on when you need to turn it on the most, Chris, in the postseason. What are your thoughts about Jeanette Poland going forward, perhaps, towards 2015?
Don't know.
Chris, I think, man, I think she gets in because, she does it, she goes into basically, Chris, into beast mode, basically, when it counts the most, Chris, which is in the postseason where the Sparks have had woes the past 3 years, Chris. 2012 losing to Minnesota in the last second. Phoenix in 2013 at the buzzer to, stab everybody in the heart and have them bleed out to death. And, of course, this year where it was, a battle of survival against the Mercury, Chris, where Jeanette Poland, Chris, again, proved herself that she's, that she can be a player that you can count on and rely on in the postseason. I think that gets her in for the Sparks. What about you, though, going forward again, knowing that the Sparks have had problems in the past 3 seasons in the postseason? If you bring Jeanette Poland on, Chris, is this probably a chance where you do get back and get past round 1, perhaps, in the playoffs next season, perhaps with her veteran leadership and plus her clutch play, basically in the playoffs going forward?
Yeah, I think probably bringing her on, probably get the Sparks, pass for first round, and probably past second round, and probably back to the WNBA finals since back in 2001 and 2002.
Clean up on Iowa and Mancy, Chris. 2003 was the last time LA got to the finals and lost to the Detroit Shock. So another error on you, another flop, actually, on your part again. Then, Chris, the last player to get to on the free agent wire, Chris, is Jocelyn Tinkle, who was not really a factor for the Seattle Storm because she was drafted to Seattle or came over here via import deals from Sweden and played 1 year, then went back over to Stockholm to play again, Chris. Now, the best part, though, about her, Chris, she is the tallest player on our list here of the 5 players, Chris. She stands 6'3" and is a forward. Now, Chris, the forward spots are a bit clogged between CP3, Candace Parker, Nneka Ogwumike, and Jantel Lavender, Chris, where the guard position has been a bit of a minor snafu for LA the past season. Now, Chris, Tinkle did not play this past year. She went back over to play in Sweden, back where she's from, Chris. But I think, man, the size factor, I think, may get her, Chris. But again, you don't know much about her when she plays overseas because we don't keep track of the numbers overseas. But, Chris, again, knowing, though, that she's the tallest player on the roster, and a young player still, Chris, she'll be going to her second year next season if she does come back to play over here, Chris. Is it more about the height factor going forward, Chris? I think, though, Chris, she's out, though, because the Sparks have a logjam of forwards on the depth chart between Candace, Ace 3, folks, in case you're wondering out there, between NO30 and Lav. I don't think there's much room here for a forward on the roster, unless, Chris, she's a forward guard, perhaps. I believe, though, she's a forward center. And I believe, Chris, that all those spots, so the forward spot and the center spot are both pretty much, Chris, occupied by better players, Chris. I think she's the odd woman out because of her position, Chris, because she's a forward, having, again, Chris, with the Sparks have an overload here, Chris. But then again, Chris, if players leave, you can bring her in, though. But again, Chris, your thoughts about Jocelyn Tinkle, again, 6'3" forward that played for Seattle the past 2 seasons, did not play last year, went back to Stockholm, Chris. Again, a young player, but again, Chris, are you a bit concerned, though, man, about her being a forward, again, knowing, though, that there's a lot of players in front of her on the depth chart as far as it goes with Parker, NO, and Lav at the forward spot right now on the roster and depth chart?
Yeah, I think probably a lot of depth charts. I think probably hard for her to make the roster.
Yeah, Chris. Unfortunately, Chris, I believe that Jocelyn is the odd woman out here again because Chris. There's nothing wrong, Chris. There's nothing wrong, Chris, with being a forward. I mean, I was a forward when I played basketball 14 years ago at age 6, folks. I was a 4'7" forward. But Chris, the problem though here with LA, you've got enough forwards already. I mean, you're basically coming out. I mean, Chris, you basically got forwards coming out the street corner, out of the closet, all over the place, man. They're basically, all over the roster. Where, Chris, I believe, though, that the Sparks' emphasis needs to be, Chris, and should be on the guard play because the guard play, Chris, was pretty bad last year, Chris, where it almost made me want to go and puke sometimes last season because of a few particular players, Chris, that just had, a very rough season, man. And I think, though, man, again, looking back over Chris and just staying with Jocelyn Tingle real quick again, man. I think the reason why, Chris, that she's kind of out of the running here again, man, is the forwards, man. There's so many forwards on this roster. Between Parker and Agumake and Jantel at the center position, Chris. I mean, you've got enough depth there, Chris. You've got to address guard depth, and Chris, 4 out of the 5 players here, Chris, Gray Lawson, Simmons, Mitchell, and Poland, Chris, they're all guards. So, I mean, you can bring all 4 of those players in, give them a chance, and I believe, Chris, that Simmons and Poland are my early favorites here to make the roster because I think that Leilani is going to go back and play down in Australia where she's from, Chris, because she also was going to take time off, too, for the FIBA tournament as well, and I think, Chris, that Gray Lawson's also out because, I think that her size does not really help out Los Angeles anytime soon. But again, Chris, if you had to pick 2 players from the 5 people we listed, Chris, who gets your 2 training camp contract invites and why?
Simmons and Poland, since Simmons will give depth through, 3-point line, that since the Sparks are lacking, we got Tolliver, and it would be great to have Simmons with 3-point line specialist, and also Poland, since she's great in the postseason, which the Sparks mostly can't get past the first round, and everything.
Chris, I say Simmons because, folks, in case you're wondering again, folks, but again, we will have another Christy Tolliver snafu next year, folks. KT will, again, folks, be on her way out of LA next year, again, to go back over to Slovakia to partake in further training for the 2016 Olympic Games for Slovakia. So, Chris, 2 things here. Address your guard play and your 3-point shooting, Chris, because when KT leaves next year, Chris, I don't want to hear any sob stories from any fans out there. I'm not trying to be hard on you guys, but no more garbage talk about KT leaving because these were obligations she fulfilled this past season because it was in her contract and the front office let her go. She is not being disloyal and not being dishonest here. She's taking care of personal reasons that we know that players have to address during the season over the course of everything going on with, how much there's a lot of problems with the WNBA. So, again, I don't want any more talk about Tolliver selling out on a team because she's going overseas, folks, when you can't really live off a $110,000 paycheck in the WNBA. You got to go somewhere else and make more money. But, Chris, got to address those 2 things, Chris. You got to address the guard play for one, Chris, and you have got to address that pretty bad 3-point shooting, Chris. Now, current players, Chris, I think that might be on the way out, Chris. I believe, man, that, and it's, Chris, it's kind of tough here to sit here and who's going to be going out of LA pretty soon, Chris. I think, though, man, that 2 players, unfortunately, that do leave because of their ties to Carol Ross will include Arminty Harrington and Lindsey Harding because both those players had great chemistry with Coach Ross. Of course, with Arminty playing under Coach Carol Ross at Ole Miss, and, of course, when Lindsey Harding played under Coach Ross in Atlanta. Chris, it's kind of tough to decipher, man, who's going to be gone now. Chris, we do know so that Shorty Mama 24 did tell us, though, Chris, that right now Elena Beard, Lavin, and NO, Chris, are all unrestricted free agents, Chris, because the entire 2011 rookie class is all free agents here because of their contracts ending. Chris, I think, though, man, it kind of actually, Chris, depressed me a bit here to talk about, who's going to be leaving because, we love all the players on the Sparks to death because they become best friends with us on Twitter and Instagram and whatever, Chris. But it's tough, though, man, to kind of sit here and, say, who's going to be the first player to leave, Chris. Now, I said Harrington and Harding, Chris, only because they had, close ties to Carol Ross because, Arminty had played under Ross at Ole Miss. Harding had played under Ross in Atlanta. Chris, if you had to think of 1 or 2 players, Chris, who might be gone from LA from this past year's team, either contract problems or some other problems just that might force them to be out of LA, who do you think it might be and why?
I think probably I want to say maybe Lindsey Harding, maybe.
Chris, I think though, man, I think that Harding is probably on everyone's hit list to leave Los Angeles. Unfortunately, it's very sad to see that, Chris, because you can't control one player's season, Chris. And how last year how she was dynamite in big situations, Chris. For this year, it was just one of those bad seasons, and every player and team will have that bad season, Chris. And I think we're all guilty a bit of kind of giving her the brunt end of the stick for a bit because of her bad play all season. Where then again, Chris, everyone's going to have it. I mean, especially, Chris, it was her and Elena that had bad seasons. Candice Wiggins, Chris, can't really be talked about because, she had an injury that kept her up for half the year, Chris. Now, someone, though, Chris, brought up about Candice Wiggins being gone, Chris. I think you can't do that, Chris. I mean, you can't just, tell her to leave because of one season where she was injured, Chris. I think she'll be back for next season. Right now, I think who stays, Chris, will be Candace Parker, Agumake, and Lav. They're, because I think the four players I see staying, Chris, will be Parker, Agumake, Lavender, and Tolliver, Chris. I think those four players are safe. Everyone else, Chris, I'm not really too sure about. Now, Wiggins might be in there, Chris, because you can't, Chris, I think it'd be unfair for one, Chris, to just tell Wiggins to just say get out of here because of one season, Chris, where she was injured. I mean, you can't control injuries, and you can't control how the team plays every night. But Chris, looking across, okay, so Chris, let's just say this here that we'll say that Parker, Agumake, Lavender, KT, and Wiggins stay. Everyone else is sort of kind of on the bubble, Chris. Other than your first choice, Chris, who else do you think may not return next year because of a few reasons, either their contract expired or other things, Chris? Who do you think possibly leaves LA and why?
Probably maybe I'll say maybe Jantown Lavender, maybe a trade, probably.
Yeah, Chris, I was just going to bring up, that there's the possibility too of either Lav and possibly NECA being gone in trade, perhaps, Chris, in trades, perhaps. Now remember, folks, again now folks got to remember here that again that Magic Johnson, again, Chris, is giving Candace Parker all the controls to name who plays on the team, Chris. So, I mean, this might be the year, Chris, where you may see big pieces leave, Chris, where in return, though, man, you could get a few big pieces coming into Los Angeles this season. Now, again, folks, as much as it may hurt us to, talk about seeing players leave, folks, trust us, folks. You want to see every player stay because we love the players so much. But again, folks, it is kind of what it is where you'll see your favorite players leave. Like when we saw Jenna O'Hay leave last year for Seattle, it was pretty tough on me at least because she was pretty much a talking person on Twitter and stuff. But again, we'll take your tweets though on Twitter again at LA Sparks 365 at CallumAc3 at LA Sparks Fan 30. If it comes down to it, folks, which current Sparks players do you see possibly leaving LA for future endeavors? Let us know on Twitter, and we'll read your tweets throughout the course of the remainder of the show. Now, Chris, we go back here to the free agent target list. Now, again, folks, the first compiled list here from the Sparks front office, again, includes Alexis Gray Lawson, Megan Simmons, Leilani Mitchell, Jeanette Pollin, and Jocelyn Tinkle. Those 5 players are the first 5 players that are currently on the Sparks' free agent target list right now, again, which again is Gray Lawson, Simmons, Mitchell, Pollin, and Tinkle. Those 5 players are right now on the short list right now of free agents that could be coming to Los Angeles. Now, again, Chris, as we go towards what you brought about Lav and NECA, Chris. Now, if the Sparks want to make some blockbuster video trade here, Chris, which would involve a big superstar, Chris, it will come at a price, man, because no one's going to trade for Faria Abdi and for Nikki Green, as we do, in fact, have a tweet here real quick from Shorty Mamba 24 on Twitter, Chris. Shorty does say, if I can find it here real quick, I thought I just saw it here at this point in time, but I do have it here. She does say, I think Pollin is the best player on that list and should be LA's first priority. Yeah, Chris, I think it's either, I think everyone, Chris, can agree right now it's either Pollin or Simmons as everybody's number 1 pick right now to get those 2 to Los Angeles. Now, Pollin, again, I think that sure would agree, though, Chris, again, because Pollin has been so clutch in her career, a big puzzle piece of that 2012 finals team with the with that team with Atlanta, I almost said Atlanta, with Indiana. I'm getting my Atlanta's and Indiana screwed up over here for some reason, probably because they both end in an A, perhaps, for all that I know, folks. But Chris, I think though that again with Jeanette Poland, again with what she did with the Fever in 2012, again, that's why I believe that she is the top priority right now for the Sparks, and I do agree with Shorty that again Poland is the first option right now for the Sparks at this point in time. Again, folks, again, if you did not catch the earlier party, but again, the 5 players that are currently on the LA Sparks' free agent wire, again, is Alexis Gray-Lawson, 4th-year guard, that was with Phoenix. Megan Simmons, 2nd-year guard. Leilani Mitchell, 8th-year guard. Jeanette Poland, 5th-year guard. And Jocelyn Tinkle, 2nd-year forward. Now, again, Chris, as we do get ready to wrap up here for the night, again, man, I believe, though, that Jocelyn Tinkle will be the Sparks' odd man out because, again, she's a forward on a pretty much just a forward-loaded ball club here between Candace Parker, Nneka Agumake, and Jantel Lavender, working out at center right now, Chris. So, Chris, as we kind of look over the list again, man, as we get ready to wrap up here for the night, your lasting thoughts, Chris, about the list, and again, who do you think will be invited to Sparks training camp and why in 2015?
I think probably Simmons and Poland, since Simmons will give depth from the three-point line with Tolliver, probably like Wiggins if she could stay healthy, and get depth from the three-point line, and Poland will give some that presence in the playoffs that the Sparks have that need to get over the hump in the first round in the playoffs and probably get to the promised land of the WNBA Finals.
Chris, I think everyone out there agrees. I know Shorty agrees with us about Poland, but I think, Chris, that Poland and Simmons are the 2 people the Sparks must, not have to, they must bring in for camp come 2015. Now, folks, again, more and more free agents, folks, will be released. I will get those from my little birdie in the Sparks front office, folks. He will get those to me at a later time and date when the list becomes more available. Shorty also says on Twitter, she says, I think the 2 players that might not possibly return is Harding and Harrington. So, Chris, I believe that, you get 2 players in, you get 2 players out, though. But, Chris, I think, though, that we can all agree here that I think Poland and Simmons are in. And right now, Chris, looks like it's Harrington and Harding that are going to be out for LA come 2015. Do you agree with that aspect right now?
I agree about Harding, but I don't know about Harrington because this past season, Harrington with those steals, I think probably I see her staying probably.
Yeah, I think Minty might stay one more season, but again, Chris, there is that talk though, man, about there is that that little thing in the back of everyone's mind, she played under Carol Ross, and Ross isn't coaching now. Is she going to leave as well? But again, Shorty Mama 24 on Twitter says, think the 2 players that might not possibly return is Harding and Harrington. With that, folks, we will close up shop and end it right here for the night, folks. We will see you folks back here tomorrow night as we recap the 2014 season for the Connecticut Sun. For Chris Mancy from the A&R Studios in Anaheim, California, Cal McClurg from Studio 171 San Diego saying good night. We'll see you folks back here tomorrow night, back here at 10 o'clock for another recap. Tomorrow night we are recapping the 2014 season for the Connecticut Sun. Until tomorrow night, folks, have a safe night. Drive home safely. Thank you all for coming, and good night now. This has been the LA Sparks 365 Network. We are Sparks. We are LA. We are the WNBA. We'll see you folks tomorrow night. See you then. Bye-bye.